Hello, everybody. There are three of us on today's training as we're recording, and today's training will be focused on really just giving some general information on the home and community-based settings final rule. And specifically, we use this training for providers that are new or settings that are new that haven't been determined compliant at this point. My name's Heather Mossinger, and I'm from the Department of Health, and we also have
Amy Huppy from the Division of Services for People with Disabilities.
And I'm Jessica Hooper with the Office of Quality and Design with the Department of Human Services.
So just to start off, the Home and Community-Based Final Rule, or you'll hear us call it the Settings Rule, is a federal rule that governs where and how services are provided to individuals receiving services under a Medicaid home and community-based waiver. So all services that fall under a Medicaid home and community-based waiver, including services under the Division of Services for People with Disabilities, or DSPD, have to or will have to comply with this rule. The effective date of the rule was back in March 17th of 2014, and states must demonstrate compliance with the rule by March 17th of 2023 for all existing services. And that date has changed a couple of times over the years. There's been a couple extensions that have been given, but the current date right now is March 17th, 2023. Now, when we're talking about new settings have to be compliant right now. So before services are provided in the new setting, we have to be able to determine that those settings are compliant. They do not get the same transition time. So the final rule establishes kind of four basic things. It establishes mandatory requirements for the qualities of home and community-based services. It tells us settings that are not home and community-based services. It tells us settings that are presumed to not be home and community-based, and then it tells us how the state needs to come into compliance and what the transition requirements are. And we'll go into some of these in a little bit more detail. So talking a little bit more about new settings, there's a lot of information on this slide. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but we want to make sure that you had the information for yourself. But basically, any setting that is considered a new setting, so a setting that's been built or a setting that has moved into a new setting, or there's a new program opened in that setting, if any of those situations happens, then we have to make sure that they're compliant when they start those services in that new setting. And basically what the rule says is Medicaid cannot pay for services that don't comply. So if you're not settings compliant, then you can't get paid by Medicaid. And basically there's a process that you'll have to go through, and this is part of that process to make sure that you are settings compliant prior to providing services. Now we're going to give you a lot of information today that's going to kind of detail what settings compliance looks like. But when we're talking about the philosophy of the rule and really what the rule is about, the underlying principle of the rule and the goal of system transformation is really about community inclusion for all Medicaid HCBS participants. So when we're talking about this details, just try to remember that really the end goal is to make sure that individuals are really integrated and included in the community that they're a part of. So let's talk a little bit about those settings that are clearly not home and community based by the nature of the settings. And those include nursing facilities, institution for mental diseases or IMDs, intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual disabilities, so those are ICFs, IDDs, and hospitals. Those are all clearly non-home and community-based settings. Then there are some settings that are presumed not to be home and community-based. And so these are settings that basically have to go through a little bit more extra work for us to determine whether they meet the requirements of the settings rule or not. And those are settings in a publicly or privately owned facility providing inpatient treatment, settings on the grounds of or adjacent to a public institution, or settings with the effect of isolating individuals from the broader community of individuals not receiving home and community-based services. Now, throughout this presentation, you're going to hear us say facilitating opportunity quite often. So we wanted to kind of describe what that looks like. So when we're talking about the requirement of facilitating opportunity, that can look different depending on the circumstances. So these are some of the ways that that can happen. The setting provides the resources required, and we're talking about different resources such as transportation, activities, funding, support staff, etc. So the setting just provide those resources. The setting can also provide training and or support to access resources not provided by the setting. So such as public transportation, how to contact a case coordinator and natural supports, budgeting. They can just provide that training or support. And really, when we're talking about facilitating opportunity, we're talking about making sure that individuals have the same opportunities that are given to others without disabilities, that individuals receive the support they require to access these same opportunities to the level that they desire, and it's promoting independence and increasing opportunities for engaging in preferred activities, events, and experiences. So we just want to make sure you kind of had an understanding of what that looked like, because we are going to use that phrase throughout the presentation. Now, when we're talking about settings that CMS kind of coded as presumed not home and community-based, CMS has basically said they're going to take the following factors into account in determining whether a setting may have the effect of isolating individuals receiving services from the broader community. And these are the things that we need to look out. Due to the design or model of service provision in the setting, individuals have limited, if any, opportunities for interaction in and with the broader community. The setting restricts beneficiary choice or to receive services or to engage in activities outside of the setting, or the setting is physically located separate and apart from the broader community and does not facilitate beneficiary opportunity to access the broader community and participate in community services consistent with the beneficiary's person-centered service plan. And the "and" is very important, because a setting being physically located separate and apart from the broader community on its own does not automatically make them to be presumed not HCBS. So when we're talking about rural settings, settings located in rural areas, they're not automatically presumed to have the qualities of an institution. So they're not automatically qualified as institutional in nature. So when we're looking at a rural setting, what we're doing is we're looking and making sure that that setting is not isolating to the beneficiaries in that setting compared to the access that individuals living in the same geographical area have to engage in the community. So, if they're able to take the same amount of classes, if they're able to have access to the same amount of resources, if they're able to access the same type of transportation as everybody else in that community, then that's what we're looking at to determine whether they're isolated or not. And you can find additional guidance on isolating and institutional factors and how to overcome them at that link that's provided there. It gives some really good examples, some ways to kind of overcome some of these institutional type factors. So the setting rule also defines how a home and community-based setting is compliant. And these are kind of the main areas. It is integrated in and supports access to the greater community. It provides opportunities to seek employment and work in competitive integrated settings, engage in community life, and control personal resources. It ensures the individual receives services in the community to the same degree of access as individuals not receiving Medicaid, HCBS services. And kind of a caveat to that, and something that we have to make really clear, is when we're talking about reverse integration activities, and what that means is reverse integration involves bringing people and activities from the broader community into the setting instead of supporting people in the setting to access the broader community. So bringing volunteers into the setting versus volunteering out of the setting, or bringing church services into a setting versus going out to the church services in your community. Those are considered reverse integration. And reverse integration activities are not sufficient to meet the true intent and spirit of the HCBS settings rule. So visits by community members have value, and we don't discourage them in any way, but it cannot replace community access for individuals in the greater community. And the greater community basically means the community in which an individual lives, plays, and works in. So it's typically, like the county they live in, the town they live in, the city they live in, work in, and play in. And so it just kind of depends. The community may look a little bit different for different individuals. So what can this look like? We're looking to see if the setting is located among other residential buildings, private businesses, retail businesses, restaurants, etc., that facilitates integration with the greater community. So if individuals have the ability to walk to different businesses, restaurants, a convenience store, and they're able to do that independently, then that's a lot easier to demonstrate compliance with the settings rule. Now, if a setting is not located in an area where they do have access to these without having to get on public transportation or in a car or by staff or whatnot, that doesn't make them not compliant. We just have to make sure that the setting is able to demonstrate that they're still able to get to and be integrated into their greater community in a different way. So the setting allows the individuals the freedom to move about inside and outside of the setting as opposed to one restricted room or area within the setting, and they are allowed to come and go at any time. Now the caveat to this is they are allowed to come and go at any time unless there's a health and safety individualized restriction that has been put into place for an individual. But that's only allowed if it's gone through the restriction and modification process, which we'll go over a little bit later. The setting facilitates the opportunity for individuals to have access to and control their personal funds. And the setting provides information about or training on how to access and use public transportation, such as buses, taxis, Uber, whatever is available in their specific community. It also ensures an individual's rights of privacy, dignity, respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint, optimizes individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, and facilitates individual choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. So what can this look like? We need to ensure that an individual's information is kept private, that setting staff interact and communicate with individuals respectfully and in a manner in which they would like to be addressed. Individuals can have a private cell phone, computer, or other personal communication device, or the setting provides access to a device to use for personal communication in private. And in settings with more than one individual, each individual's supports and plans to address behavioral needs are specific to the individual and not the same as everyone else in the setting. And that's one of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about individualized services. We want to make sure that we're optimizing individual initiative. The setting offers a secure place for individuals to store personal belongings. The setting supports individuals who need assistance with their personal appearance in private. The setting affords dignity to diners. So, an example of that would be not requiring to wear bibs. They can if they choose to, but it's not a requirement of the provider or the setting. The setting allows the individuals to engage in legal activities, such as voting when 18 or older, consuming alcohol when 21 or older, playing video games with adult content, watching any other media with adult content, in a manner consistent with individuals not receiving Medicaid-funded services and support. So individuals need to have that same opportunity to engage in legal activities as anybody else would. And the physical environment supports a variety of individual goals and needs. So there's typically indoor and outdoor gathering spaces, larger group activities, as well as solitary activities, stimulating as well as calming activities, so that there's just some space that individuals can go if they need some time, kind of some solitary time, and there's also areas for some group activities. So how do we facilitate individual choice? The setting does not restrict services, providers, or supports and offers the opportunity for individuals to update or change their preferences. This is really important. Individuals need to be able to choose who provides their services what kind of supports they have, and they need to be able to update that if they want to. The setting provides the individuals receiving support in developing plans, individualized goals to support their needs and preferences. Okay, so again, those goals and plans need to be individualized. Setting staff is knowledgeable about the capabilities, interests, preferences, and needs of the individual so that they're able to provide their services accordingly. And tasks and activities are matched to individual skills, abilities, and desires. It's not just automatically done the same for every individual in the setting. Individuals can sit in any seat in a dining area, can eat privately if desired, and can request an alternative meal if the setting provides meals. And so this is really important. People need to be able to sit wherever they want to sit. They need to eat by themselves if that's their choice. And, if they choose to sit in the same seat every single day, that is absolutely their choice. It just cannot be the provider or the setting that is saying that they have to sit in that seat every day.
So there are requirements of the HCBS settings rule that are specific to provider-controlled residential settings only. A setting is considered provider-owned and or controlled when the setting in which the individual resides is a physical place that is owned, co-owned, and or operated by a provider of a home and community-based service. So there is a link to a flyer that gives specific examples and information on provider-controlled residential settings that you're welcome to follow, included in this slide. But we're gonna cover in greater detail, but just quickly, some different aspects of that. The first one being the individual needs to be able to have a lease or other legally enforceable agreement that provides similar protections to anybody else in that setting. The setting needs to ensure that the individual has privacy in their sleeping and or living unit, including lockable doors, choice of roommates, and freedom to furnish or decorate the unit. The setting needs to ensure that the individual has freedom and support to control his or her own schedule and activities and have access to food at any time. And then the individual can have visitors of his or her choosing at any time, and the setting needs to be physically accessible to the individuals living there. So we'll go into a little bit more detail in each of those, but first let's talk about the legally enforceable agreement. A lease or residency agreement is provided to each resident, and the lease or agreement should be comparable to those provided under the jurisdiction's landlord-tenant laws in that area. So these can vary. There are some state ones, but these can vary locally, so make sure that agreement matches up with the area those individuals are residing. Individuals need to be informed of their rights regarding housing and when they could be required to relocate. It needs to include how to relocate and how to request new housing. And then a written agreement also needs to include language that provides protections to address eviction processes and appeals comparable to those provided under the jurisdiction landlord-tenant laws, again, to anybody that would be living in that area. Individuals need to have privacy and freedom to furnish or decorate their own units. So only necessary staff have keys to an individual's private living spaces. So keys to the house, keys to the apartment, keys to their private rooms or bathrooms. There should not just be general access to anybody, but those should be assigned for specific purposes. And then staff should only use a key to enter a living area or private space under limited circumstances agreed upon with the individual. So make sure you're discussing what those extenuating circumstances would be in those individual situations, and staff are educated on when they could use that key. Staff always knock and receive permission prior to entering a private living space. Furniture, linens, and other household items should reflect individual preferences, interests, hobbies, and as desired by the individuals living in that unit or that home. Individuals should have choice of roommates, and individuals should know how to request roommate changes if those become necessary. Locks are also part of provider-controlled residential setting consideration. So a work group comprised of various stakeholders met and discussed locks in a residential setting where an individual's room is their private living space in depth in April of 2018. The work group came to consensus that having a lock on both the bedroom and bathroom door is the default to ensure individuals' rights to dignity and respect. It is the choice of the individual when and how they use the lock. So those locks need to be provided, but people can choose when and how they use those in those spaces. Individuals must be able to close and lock their bedroom door and bathroom door unless there is a restriction for the individual for their specific health and safety, and that can only be implemented on a case-by-case basis as assessed by the team and addressing a specific need to that person and has been approved through the rights restriction and person-centered planning process. So when installing locking door hardware, locks also need to be compliant with some ADA rules with different fire codes in your areas. Make sure that the person living in that situation is actually able to use that type of lock. So a big takeaway, you can read through some of the considerations to make sure you're in compliance with rules, is to make sure the type of doorknob and lock being used is one that that person could decide for themselves if they want to lock or not. So there is a more detailed flyer, again, that the work group has put together on locks that you can follow that link and read up about if you have specific questions. Individuals can have visitors of their choosing at any time. Residential settings should not have set posted visitor hours. There should not be restrictions on visitor areas. Individuals should be able to decide who and when and where in their own home they have visitors. So individuals should be able to have private visits with friends and family. At default, people should be managing that themselves at the individual level. A setting is physically accessible to the individual. So settings need to ensure that there are not gates, like Velcro strips, locked doors, barriers preventing individual entrance or exit from certain areas of the setting. So they should be able to get into their private areas, all of the common areas of their home without barrier. The setting provides individuals with full access to typical facilities in a home, such as cooking, dining areas, laundry facilities, shared seating areas like living rooms, family rooms, that sort of thing. And the setting is physically accessible according to the individual's mobility needs as well. So make sure there aren't obstructions or environmental adaptations that need to be made that would make that inaccessible to the person living there without them. So please note that compliance with ADA does not equal compliance with the settings rule. So make sure you're assessing on an individual level if that person that will be living in that program can access their private and shared areas of that home. Supported living settings specifically need to have some additional considerations for provider-owned or controlled settings. So if an individual chooses to live in a provider-owned or controlled setting and receives supported living services, they can choose who provides those supported living services, including the provider who controls or owns the setting, but they can also choose somebody that does not control or own that setting. So that supported living provider, if they are also a landlord or control that setting in any way, as defined by that provider-owned and controlled settings flyer, they aren't by default the supported living provider for that person. So when an individual chooses to receive home and community-based waiver services in a provider-owned or controlled setting where the provider is paid a single rate to provide a bundle of services, the individual is choosing that provider to deliver all those services that are included in the bundled rate. So for DSPD, the RHS, the residential type services, this is different. By default, whoever you're choosing to go into that residential bundled rate with is usually the provider for everybody in that setting. But if the services are individualized one-on-one rates like supported living is, then you need the option to control who owns the setting you're living in as well as who's providing the services to you in your home. So that is the separation there with those. There is a flyer that you can reference that goes into more detail about separation of housing on HCBS settings, or if you have questions, please reach out to us. There are situations that an exception or modification to any of the settings requirements or a restriction to the person's rights can be imposed. A rights restriction is a limit to the rights of an individual due to a specific assessed need in order to support the health and safety and well-being of the individual or the community. It is a provider's responsibility to ensure safety, and individuals have the right to make decisions in their life. So these need to be balanced. We all make decisions that are not always the healthiest or safest. When these conflict, the team must consider the severity and the likelihood of potential negative outcomes against the rights of the individual and limit those rights only when they truly are necessary and according to the requirements of the settings rule. So make sure when you're looking at this that you're individualizing that. In these circumstances, modifications or restrictions must be supported by an individualized, specific, assessed need and justified and documented as part of that person-centered planning process. Keep in mind, anybody receiving services under DSPD contracts for home and communities waiver providers, these generally must also be approved by your provider human rights committee. Restricting independence or access to resources is appropriate only to reduce specific risks. Controls on persons' freedom and access to community can't be imposed on a class or group of individuals. For instance, you can't just make a rule about visitor policies for your whole company, right? Or a rule about when and where people can eat in their own homes out of convenience on training staff. These need to be specific and individualized to the people living in those settings and their needs. Restrictions or modifications cannot be implemented as house rules, like I just said, in any setting, regardless of the population served. And we'll say it again because it needs repeating. It can't be used for the convenience of your staff. Documentation of a diagnosis is not a sufficient justification. So you must clearly, as a team, demonstrate and assess need for the modification, including critical events that have happened in the past or situations that have transpired that support the need for this specific modification for that specific person. All individual right restrictions used for an individual can affect another individual in the same city to the greatest extent possible. So when you're looking at those individualized restrictions, make sure you're taking into consideration how you will circumvent or work around them for the individuals that live or work or participate in that program that don't need those restrictions. We have a couple of examples of these for you. So a common one that we hear in services are individuals that need food restrictions that result in a refrigerator or cupboards being locked. So for other individuals that participate in that program or live in that setting, there must be a way for those individuals to access the food when and how they want to without those same restrictions. So make sure you're considering workarounds like that for people that don't need those restrictions in those settings. Another example is media restriction of somebody that may not be able to view media at a higher than PG-13 rating. There needs to be ways for other individuals in those programs to access the type of media they want on personal devices or on agreed upon schedules so that their rights aren't restricted to watch or participate in activities that they enjoy. Documentation in the person-centered process needs to include, like we said before, specific individualized assessed need, prior interventions and supports, including less intrusive methods that have been tried, description of the condition and the assessed need, ongoing data measuring effectiveness of the modification, established time limits for periodic review of the modifications, individualized informed consent, and assurance that the interventions and supports will not cause harm. So make sure as a team you guys are educating individuals in your services about why that restriction is happening, what the plan is to work towards fading that restriction, what that looks like, what progress looks like, and what other things you've tried prior to implementing those restrictions so that you're restricting the least amount of things needed for that individual. The work group has also created a couple of flyers around restrictions and modifications with some more detailed examples. You're welcome to follow those links. They have some good information about that as well. Unsafe wandering or exit seeking behavior. So in some settings, there are individuals that wander or have exit seeking behavior that can be a health or safety risk. So in these particular instances, there are settings that we have in our system with like controlled egresses, and they need to be able to demonstrate on an individual basis that those restrictions are only being used for the individuals that need them, and that people that don't need those specific restrictions have an accommodation or workaround to be able to get in and out of areas that they should be able to access in common living areas or the individual living areas without those more lockdown controlled entrances and exits from different parts of the body, so buildings. So if you have specific, this doesn't come up as much in DSPD settings. It comes up in some of our other HCBS settings, but if you have specific questions on how this pertains specifically to a possible DSPD situation, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to discuss them with you in more detail.
We've been talking a lot about some of the specific changes that may need to happen as you consider your site and how to ensure that it is compliant. But we wanted to end with a bunch of examples of what different providers and other groups have done to reach some of those goals, to give you some ideas of how to move forward. So I think the biggest thing to note is this isn't just about, putting in a few locks here and there. This is really a change of mindset. It's a change of the culture that you're developing within your program, within your services, to ensure that the individuals are really at the center of everything that you're doing, and that that is really integrated and intertwined with the way that you develop your policies, your processes, the power structures or hierarchies, your values, your norms, all of those different things that go into what your program and your service delivery looks like. So we have just a few, like I said, principles and examples to share to kind of help you get thinking about what your services could look like. So some of the first promising practices that some providers have tried, and this is some examples from within the state and from other states across the country as well. So one of the first things to consider is that the best place for individuals to live and to work and to understand how to do those things more independently is within that same setting that they will be doing it in. So, helping them, supporting them to develop friendships within their community instead of always having to go to a facility to meet up with their friends, assisting them to develop those relationships, maybe with neighbors that don't have disabilities or people at, the local spots that may be close by a person's home or part of their activities throughout the day so that they can develop relationships with, that person that they get coffee from every day or whatever their specific preferred activities might be. And then practicing skills within the community. So in my last example, if they do prefer to get coffee or some other drink or breakfast every day, that they're exchanging the money and they're making their own purchase. They're learning how to do that with, the actual cashier instead of doing that within a facility setting. Other examples are things such as if you offer both work based activities and a day service, looking at how you're structuring those different types of activities, that they are distinct so that individuals can learn that what's expected and what is maybe the typical behaviors at work may be different from those outside of work in a more activity or independent living skills based day service where they're learning a different type of skill set, giving individuals the opportunity to even try those work skills out in the community, do different job experiences or job shadows, learning from people doing those jobs actually in the community where those specific work is actually performed. And this is because competitive integrated employment is a big goal and priority. We want people to have that opportunity, as mentioned earlier, the opportunity to engage in employment if they choose, and employment that they're getting at least a minimum wage or comparable to what other people within that same type of work are earning, as well as working with individuals of all abilities and being able to, again, develop those relationships with people outside of those paid to support them. Other ideas include finding ways to group those within your services that have similar interests. We wouldn't expect everyone to get a one on one service. That's not what we mean when we have talked about an individualized or person centered approach, making sure that individuals have the ability to give input in what activities are taking place or what their schedule looks like from day to day. Whether that's a group meeting where you talk about what activities are available, or having a suggestion box, or just making sure staff are trained to always be asking and available when individuals have changes or ideas that they want to suggest. Working with different transportation options, helping individuals to learn to use public transportation or to do so with support, or other opportunities for transportation that are available to other people in the community, whether it's a rideshare service or use the provider or providing that transportation. They're helping the individual know what's available to them. Assisting individuals, again, to develop that sense of community outside of whether it's a day service or residential or supported living, but outside of that provider support so that they can develop relationships with people in their immediate community. It's also important to look at what activities you're providing within your setting and what's available in the community around you, and to find opportunities for individuals to engage with their peers of all abilities to do those same activities where everyone else in the community is going. So it might include going out to the local rec center and joining a class there, or an art class at a community college, or some other opportunity, attending local events instead of having your own events that you host at your building all the time. That doesn't mean that you can't host your own events, but it's just very critical that people have the opportunity to engage in those with their community members as well. Again, learning different skills in the environment where they're going to be actually using those skills instead of always relying on role playing activities. And it may be that some individuals start with a role playing activity, and then there's a process to help them move out into using that in the community. Things such as exchanging money, talking to somebody in the store to ask a question, those kind of social skills that all of us use every day. And again, developing natural supports, not just for that social and friendship types of things, but it could end up being a support in providing transportation to activities that both are interested in going to, or helping them to find new activities they may be interested in. But just really developing those friendships, again, that the typical person in the community develops to engage in other activities, to find new things, and to learn new skills. One aspect that we get a lot of questions about is the idea of dignity of risk. We understand that people in DSPD services may have some limitations in different areas, and a lot of times they're very limited in what decisions that they are allowed to make or given the opportunity to make. And so part of the settings rule is ensuring that they can be an active participant in any decision in their life. The dignity of risk is all about allowing them to take reasonable risks in order to develop further decision making skills, to develop self esteem, to improve their ability to be independent. A lot of times we learn a lot by making mistakes or making decisions and then figuring out what the outcome is. It's important that individuals with disabilities have that same opportunity. As you can see, these two examples of what an individual can develop through positive risk taking and what some of the effects of overprotection can be. And there's a link below if you want further information on understanding dignity of risk. So, in helping someone to make an informed decision These are kind of the steps. Again, you can look at the link for more information. The basic steps that you would walk someone through to help decide on a risky type decision. You would walk the individual through what the decision is, what the situation that they're trying to resolve is, and what is the decision that they're interested in making. Help them to gather information so that they have enough information to understand what it is that they're making a decision about. So if it's financial, you may gather information about, how much does it cost to take a certain type of vacation and what does that look like in terms of their budget. And then you can explore options and consider outcomes. What are the likely negative or positive outcomes of this decision? And then allow the individual to make that decision, to act, to follow through on it, and empower them throughout the process. And then once the decision's been made, obviously depending on the decision, the time frame will be different, but talk with them and evaluate, how did that decision go? What did you think of the outcome? Was it what you expected? And through this process, again, it's about helping the individual to gain that confidence to be able to make further decisions and to have control in their life. And this can be difficult for providers, for families, and even for some individuals. This is a concept that some are probably not familiar with, and so it may take some time to process and to work through how to actually go through this process. But I think it's important to remember that all of us make decisions that aren't always the healthiest or the safest for us. But again, that's some of those mistakes are how we learn. And it's important as a support team to discuss this, to help the individual with the decisions, and of course, look at the severity of the risk that you're looking at. And maybe some decisions, this isn't the best time to make that big of a decision, and you'll want to start with some smaller steps, again, to help the individual to build up some confidence and some skills in making positive decisions, but always keeping the individual's interest and what they want at the center of the discussion, maybe finding other ways to help them get at the same outcome without as much of a risk if that's possible. So, as an example, there may be an individual who really wants to go on roller coaster rides at an amusement park, but you know that they get car sick, so this is maybe not going to end up very well for them. But walking through that process, helping them to, talk through this decision. What is it about the roller coasters that you're excited about? Even reminding them that they get car sick and what will they do if they get sick on the ride, and then helping them to decide if that's what they want to follow through with. And if it is, then supporting them to do that. And then obviously afterwards, whether they get sick or not, or however it ends up, talking through how that decision went and how they felt about it will help them to improve their autonomy and self worth. So, just a few tips again as you're making this shift towards focusing more on community integration and inclusion. Start one person at a time. It can be overwhelming to try to figure out how to get everyone in your program out into the community all the time. So start with one person or a small group that has similar interests and help them to access their community. And you'll learn from these small groups as you take them out and understand, what kind of support do they need? What kind of instruction does the staff need? What other kinds of resources and support is needed to provide this service on a bigger scale? And try not to get stuck on waiting for the perfect time or the right time to make a big shift, because that may not ever come exactly in the way you are anticipating, and it's best just to get started. When considering hiring decisions, start thinking about what your ideal staff or direct support professional, or if it's, a manager type position, think about what you would want that person to be like, what skills that you want them to have, and start hiring for that person that you are looking for. Setting goals with clear strategies to achieve your desired outcome are important, and then having a way to monitor how you're doing on your goals and where you're at is always helpful. Looking at the community around where you are providing services and seeing what businesses are out there, what other nonprofits, what volunteer opportunities, starting to build relationships with those other organizations, you can develop a lot of opportunities that way for individuals to engage with those other businesses in whatever ways make sense and meet the preferences and interests of the different people that you're serving. That can help you to develop a base of where you can start taking people out, and having that relationship can help if there are any issues that arise, you can help resolve them. Another tip or recommendation is you can always participate in an advisory group or creating an advisory group for your organization that gets the input of community members, family members, and individuals that you serve that can provide suggestions on how to engage with the community or what's available within the different areas of where you serve. So, as we've continued to talk about, the settings rule is really about community inclusion and integration. So, developing natural supports is a big element of that, helping people to feel at home in their communities. And part of that is a few of these things that we've mentioned a little bit, helping individuals develop skills in how to use a variety of public transportation options. So when they're not receiving a direct service, that they can go out and engage in different events in their community. They can go meet friends to do something on the weekend, and that they have the skill and that opportunity to know how to get from one place to another. Helping them to access technology. There are plenty of communities online that people might want to access, or family that lives far away that they want to be able to engage with, or any other, there's a lot of creative ways to develop other natural supports by using technology. And then through the activities and programs that you are developing within your services, encouraging and inviting families and people's friends to participate regularly or to visit regularly to create that greater independence and autonomy so that an individual can again develop those skills to develop those relationships on their own. In terms of sustainability, we talked about starting with small group activities and finding those individualized interests to help really get at each of the individual's goals, to help them grow within that smaller group, and helping just considering those different skills and goals as you're developing the activities. It could be that you're taking a few people to an art class, and that's what all of them are interested in, but they could be working on different skills while doing that. Emphasizing community based activities that promote that meaningful development of skills. So, in my last example, if somebody is developing, you know, the ability to exchange money and count change, that they're going out to this art class, that they're exchanging their own money, counting it when they get it back. So it's in the context of an activity that they enjoy. And then offering opportunities that could lead to volunteering or to competitive integrated employment. So as the example lists here, if you have a few people that really enjoy animals and taking care of them, that they could go out to volunteer at an animal shelter and work with people there to develop some skills on animal care. And for some, that may lead to, a job grooming animals or whatever it might be. Or for some, it may not. They may just enjoy volunteering, and that's okay too. So, to keep it simple, it's really about thinking big. What are those big goals and outcomes that you really want to get at? Start small with those smaller groups or one person at a time, and then scale fast. Develop more and more groups as you're figuring out how that functions. And then lastly is just a quick comparison of some former practices that have been good in their own time, and then how we're innovating them into new practices. We may have initially done a lot of role playing, and for some, that may still be a good place to start. But moving into practicing skills in the community while doing the activity that they would use that skill in. Instead of bringing visitors or artists into a class or as a class into your setting, finding those classes in the community and joining, the general public in the community in those courses. Being employed by the provider. Again, it might be a good place to start and to develop some skills, but then shifting to competitive integrated employment, finding ways that the individual can have a pathway to working in their community. Going from planning for an entire group to planning one person at a time and grouping them together into small groups with similar interests. Going from, you know, as the provider, creating a program schedule for everyone to participate in, to getting individual feedback and allowing individuals to pick and choose what activities and how they want their schedule to look each day. From being overly cautious or protective of what decisions an individual is given the opportunity to make, to allowing them to start developing some positive risk taking skills. From limited choice to allowing for that informed decision making process. There are plenty of other examples we could provide. This has not been an exhaustive list or training, but we hope that this gets some of your ideas flowing and gives you some place to start with any changes you may need to make. There are just a couple of references. Again, if you wanted to find more information on dignity of risk or informed decision making. And then you're always welcome to sign up for the HCBS newsletter or listserv, where you can get current information as more flyers and guidance is developed. There's the settings rule homepage, where all of the guidance that we have developed thus far, as well as information about where the state is on compliance progress, is all available on the Medicaid HCBS website. And then, as you've been encouraged all through this training, if you have questions or concerns or want to talk about different situations that you're not sure if they're compliant or what you need to do, we encourage you to always reach out to our HCBS settings email and let us know how we can help you.
So there is a quiz you will need to take if you are a new setting going through this as a new setting or a new provider. Click on that link to go ahead and take the quiz. It's just 10 questions, has a possible 30 points, and either passing of 90% or 27 out of 30 as your score. Good luck, and thanks for listening to us today.